All right, so 2025 was by no means the greatest year for horror movies, but we still had some fun ones. So let's go through and rank my top 10 horror movies of 2025. What is up, everyone? Welcome to Mad Blood. Now, first of all, let me know down in the comments down below which horror movies in 2025 were your favorite. If you have the time, post your top 10 list as well. I read all of the comments on my channel, so I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know. Personally, for me, there were a lot of disappointing horror movies in 2025 that I was really hyped for that just didn't end up panning out. But fortunately, like we do every year, there were a few movies that came out in 2025 that kind of in some ways saved the year for me. But anyways, enough of all that. Let's go ahead and get into my top 10 list of my 10 favorite horror movies of 2025. And kicking us off at number 10 comes from a fun little, found footage anthology horror franchise. And just being the age that I am, I grew up on some of, in my opinion, the greatest found footage movies of all time. The Blair Witch Project, the Paranormal Activity franchise. And so found footage just in general is a subgenre that I enjoy, but also has some nostalgia for me. And this movie in particular kind of surprised me that it made my top 10 list, but I had a good time with it, which is going to be VHS Halloween, which came out in October. So this was the 8th movie in the VHS franchise, and if you're not really familiar with this one, this particular movie consisted of 5 horror short films and then a 6th short film that kind of served as kind of like the overarching story that they kept cutting back and forth to throughout the majority of this movie. And this was a wild journey. There's a lot of variety in VHS Halloween, some crazy moments that are silly and over the top and bloody and funny, and also some like dark and just like more grounded and genuinely eerie found footage short films as well. Just a lot of variety, which I thought was a lot of fun. And also, because there were so many short films in this one, there really wasn't a lot of room for a lot of fat or a lot of character building. So on one hand, you could say that's a bad thing, but on the other hand, VHS Halloween is kind of just pedal to the metal from beginning to end. But yeah, of course, this movie is called VHS Halloween, so it's going to have a lot of Halloween-related things within it, a lot of the Halloween tropes, trick-or-treating, costumes, haunted houses, all these other things that are involved with that, which really is going to put you into the Halloween spirit, especially around fall, autumn time, September and October and stuff like that. But what I also think is cool about this one, if it's another time of year and you're just missing, the fall or Halloween time like I do throughout pretty much the entire year, you can toss this movie on and it will 100% just kind of put you back into that great mindset of that Halloween time. But there's just a lot of fun stuff going on in VHS Halloween. It is a crazy journey without a doubt. And surprisingly, one thing that really impressed me about this movie was like the big emphasis on a lot of practical work, which was really impressive. And at times, it gets really gory. There's a moment in this involving like trick-or-treaters and this witch that's flying around. Not only is it shot really well and kind of intense, but it is bloody as hell. This witch is tearing shit up in those moments. And it was definitely kind of a crazy moment with some very impressive gore throughout this entire thing. And like I said, it's just a good variety in VHS Halloween. And just thinking about all the horror movies I had seen throughout the year, a lot of times it just comes down to which movies I had the most fun with. And definitely VHS Halloween was a fun time. Now, was this movie mind-blowing, groundbreaking? Would this movie make my top 10 list on a really great horror movie year? Probably not. Like I said earlier, though, 2025, there were a lot of disappointments throughout the year. Not an amazing year for horror movies by any means, but overall, yeah, VHS Halloween, a solid entry in this franchise. All right, and coming up next at number 9, when I was thinking about this next movie, I was thinking, if you just give me an eerie, isolated, pretty atmospheric werewolf movie that has a solid setting, I'm probably gonna have a pretty good time with that movie. And I did have a good time with this one, which coming up next at number 9 is going to be Wolfman, which came out, seems like a lifetime ago, but came out in January and was directed by Lee Whannell, who a lot of you know from the Saw franchise. So technically this movie is a reboot of The Wolfman from 1941, but when it comes to my horror movies, I'm a big atmosphere guy. Sometimes when the dialogue or the story isn't all that groundbreaking or unique or really all that good, the atmosphere, the way the movie looks, the way the movie makes you feel can oftentimes really carry an entire movie for me. And just thinking about somewhat recent movies that had that angle to them and really helped those movies like, from 2024, like a movie like Azrael or Oddity or even Alien Romulus. Very, very flawed movies, but the way they look, the way they made me feel, the vibe of the movie really carried them throughout. And I'm sure with Wolfman, a lot of people probably left the theater and thought the movie was pretty boring, but I don't know, maybe I was in the right headspace or just caffeinated just enough. I really enjoyed just like the approach to the movie and the eeriness of it. And I remember leaving the theater after watching this one, and it was kind of exactly what I expected it to be. An isolated movie, mainly in one location, a very small cast, but a great setting that really, really hits home for me. And this setting in particular, I've spent a lot of time up on the back roads in the forest, deep in the woods, where it's foggy and misty and moody, up in Washington and Oregon and Northern California. I grew up in Northern California, so I love those places. I would live up there for the rest of my life in a second if I had the real opportunity to do so. Unfortunately, I do not, but I love it up there. So this setting in particular maybe might not work for you. And I know that they technically filmed this movie in New Zealand, but still they were portraying virtually a replica of the woods up in Oregon, which just really works for a werewolf story like this. The eeriness, the moodiness of that type of a setting. And if you've been up there in some of these small towns, there are entire towns that are built off of the legend of Bigfoot. Like they sell merchandise and it's like a huge economical thing for them and a big deal. And there's a lot of people that believe that there's things that do live in the woods up there. And I love that. I love those campfire stories, scary stories you would hear about hikers, just ghost stories you would hear camping or hiking, whatever have you, which I thought really, really worked in this movie. Also, I mentioned a second ago the small cast. So if there was one or two people in particular in the cast that really didn't do a good job, it could pretty much ruin this movie because there's not a lot of characters to choose from. But I think the cast from top to bottom was pretty solid. Julia Garner in particular, I think was really good in this movie. Great to see her back doing some more stuff. She kind of came on my radar originally after seeing her work in Ozark, a great show, and she plays a very niche character in that show, but you could clearly see the talent was there for her to do other stuff with other characters with other personalities, and this character is very different than that character in Ozark, but she does a great job in this movie and helps to carry it without a doubt. So, I mean, did Wolfman absolutely blow me away? Like one of the greatest movies I've seen in the last decade or something like that? No, not necessarily. But like I mentioned earlier, 2025 is not an amazing year for horror movies by any means. But I thought it was a fun, atmospheric journey with some rewatchability for me. And at the very least, if you don't really enjoy the story, or if, I don't think the story was all that mind-blowing, or the characters, or the Wolfman transformation, or anything like that was all that crazy, just being put back into this setting up in the mountains, it's supposed to be Oregon, the moodiness of it, the fog, the mist, the mystery, something creeping around in the shadows in the woods, killing hikers and various things like that. I think it's a damn good time. So yeah, Wolfman coming in at number 9 for 2025 for me. Okay, coming up next at number 8 is a sneaky little sci-fi horror movie that I feel like I have heard nobody talk about, but I remember when I originally saw the marketing for this movie, I was just thinking to myself, I don't care if nobody talks about this movie or nobody sees this movie. I am going to go and see this movie at some point in 2025 because it looks like it's right up my alley and it sounds pretty fun. And yes, it was pretty fun. So the movie coming in at number 8 is going to be Ash, which came out in March. Now, admittedly, I'm a big sci-fi fan, whether it's movies, whether it's books, whether it's astronomy, whatever it is. I just love all that stuff. So I'm sure if you're not as big of a sci-fi fan, not as big as a sci-fi horror fan, this movie probably wouldn't even crack your top 10 list. But for me, I just eat that stuff up, and I had a lot of fun with a lot of things that were in this movie. And after watching it, you can clearly see that it's a lower budget. It didn't get a big theatrical run. It didn't get a lot of marketing or anything like that. But it's not as small of a budget where you can clearly tell it looks like something made for the Sci-Fi Channel, where it looks really janky at times. Yeah, there's some stuff in the movie that doesn't look amazing, it doesn't look like a Christopher Nolan movie or anything like that, but it does kind of hit that mark of looking and feeling like a low-ish budget movie that is appropriately like a limited theatrically run movie. And there's times where it actually does kind of feel like the budget is being stretched in a good way, and they're able to pull off some stuff that is actually kind of impressive for a smaller movie like this. And yeah, just being a sci-fi horror movie like a million sci-fi horror movies have done before it, there's clearly some stuff in this movie that's inspired by a movie like Alien, one of my favorite sci-fi horror movies of all time, easily. So there's going to be some stuff there where they're kind of tipping their cap, but also it doesn't feel like they're ripping things off from a movie like Alien, which is good. That's important. Also, there's definitely going to be some things that clearly seem inspired by John Carpenter's The Thing, one of the greatest horror movies of all time for me. Now, that feels a little bit like too much on the nose at times when you're considering some of the stuff that's clearly inspired by The Thing, but still, when you're taking inspiration from some of the all-time great sci-fi horror movies, of course, that's not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're able to mainly keep it and mainly make it feel like you're not just copying and pasting it. That's a good thing, and I think this movie does take the inspiration, but kind of puts their own new, fresh approach to it, which I thought was cool. Also, there are some moments in Ash that kind of feel like a slasher movie on another planet, in space, you could say, which was pretty cool. That was kind of refreshing. I wasn't expecting that because in a lot of ways, it's just like an eerie sci-fi horror movie with some darkness and stuff like that. But in this movie, no, they implement some cat and mouse moments, some blood, guts, and gore. And I thought that elevated a lot of the scenes in Ash. And I kind of mentioned this a little bit just a second ago, but I think for this size of a movie, the way things look, I actually think they pulled it off pretty well. And in particular, the space station they're in, I think looked gritty and it looked the way that I would want it to look in a lot of ways. I like how it's lit dark. They got the color grading pretty on point. And also going into watching this movie, a big thing with the marketing that also intrigued me with this one is it clearly looked like it was going to be kind of dark, but also they were going to utilize some of the bright lights that kind of mix well with that, the reds and greens and other things. And I think the lighting in this one and just the cinematography, I guess you could say, I thought was pulled off pretty well. But with that said, just because of the size of this movie, yeah, the planet that they're supposed to be on kind of doesn't even feel like it's really actually there, nor do they try to really show that planet a lot because they kind of know their limitations. That's not a great part of the movie. And yes, there is definitely some questionable CGI in certain small moments in this one as well that will actually kind of remind you of The Thing prequel from 2011, a movie I'm actually a fan of because I just eat everything up that's involved, or related to The Thing. But I think overall, the effects, the practical effects, the way the movie looks, yeah, not perfect, but I think they pulled it off. And one of the biggest draws when I first saw the marketing for this movie was, okay, we've got a dark, gritty, looks like a scary sci-fi horror movie in space that looks like it's lit pretty cool. But on top of that, Aaron Paul is going to be in the movie. So that's a big draw, being the big Breaking Bad fan that I am. So yeah, he was in this, and I think he was pretty good. There's some fun twists and turns along the way with his character, some stuff maybe you wouldn't expect with his character. The other main character is this woman named Isa Gonzalez. She's a huge part of this story, even bigger than Aaron Paul's character in a lot of ways, and I think she's pretty solid in this. She shows some emotion when she needs to. She's got some scenes where she's kicking ass. She's doing some more action stuff that I think she pulled off pretty well. I will say, though, on one hand, with Isa, I mean, she's great to look at in this movie without a doubt, but pretty much everyone else in this cast is kind of, normal looking. So you're kind of watching the movie, I felt like I was at least. I was like, why is there a supermodel in space dealing with all of this shit. So yeah, on one hand, it's not a bad thing by any means, but there are some moments where I guess you could say it's maybe a little bit distracting. And kind of like I mentioned just a second ago, there is some stuff when it comes to the gore and other things that I felt like surprised me. There's a lot of body horror in this movie. Like I mentioned earlier, will kind of remind you of John Carpenter's The Thing, but surprisingly, there is a good amount of blood, guts, and gore in the second half of this movie, which gets pretty wild and over the top, and I felt like kind of caught me off guard and elevated a lot of those scenes for me, just being the big slasher fan that I am and also the sci-fi horror fan that I am. So cat and mouse moments with blood and guts and over the top gore, some of it CGI, some of it practical. And I thought that was pretty cool to see in a movie like this. And again, this is number 8 on my top 10 list in a year for horror movies I feel like is not amazing by any means. So did Ash absolutely blow me away as one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies in many, many years or anything like that? No, but I think for an under-the-radar sci-fi horror movie that is made by a DJ that nobody is talking about, but you just set that to the side, still, I had a good time with Ash overall. All right, and coming up next at number 7 is a movie that honestly, I can't even believe even cracked my top 10 list, let alone is gonna be at number 7 for the entire year for me, because the first movie that came out before this one was not good at all. So the sequel, I really was not even looking forward to seeing. It was really an afterthought. I wasn't even sure if I even was gonna make any effort to see it at all, but obviously, I am glad I did, because there was a lot of things that I did really enjoy, and I thought they did a lot better than the first time around, which is going to be the slasher movie, The Strangers Chapter 2. I know, just hear me out. This is kind of crazy, I get it, but hear me out. Like I said, this movie came out in September. And when it comes to talking about movies, I'm always going to tell it how it is. If I think your movie was shit, I'm gonna say that. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I don't care who enjoyed it or who didn't enjoy it. I don't care what the narrative is around that movie. But also on the other hand, if I thought the movie was fun, I don't care what other people are saying. I'm going to say that. And specifically with The Strangers Chapter 2, yes, this movie is very flawed, and I'll talk about that more in just a second, but it took a lot of the things that the first chapter did. Most of those things that first chapter did horribly, annoyingly wrong, and just deleted that completely and went a different route. This movie is essentially like a 90-minute cat and mouse movie that's atmospheric, doesn't have an overusage of dialogue. Hell, there's like an entire sequence, I am not even exaggerating. It is like a 30-minute sequence in this movie where I feel like there's maybe a couple sentences of dialogue. They're really letting those scenes just breathe. They're letting the shots linger. And speaking of shots, there's actually some surprisingly great shots in this movie as well, in those cat and mouse moments that really like adds the eeriness and the atmosphere and just like the tension in those moments. There's also some shots that very much reminded me of one of the greatest slasher movies ever made, one of my favorites ever, which is the original Halloween 2. Obviously, the beginning of this movie is in a hospital, so there's that there with Halloween 2. I think hospitals are great for a slasher movie. There's dead bodies there. It's nighttime. Hospitals are just kind of creepy. But specifically, there's some shots kind of at an angle in the corner, in some of the hallways, that very much reminded me of Halloween 2. Michael Myers just kind of walking slowly, Dick Warlock robotically walking through the hallways. And in this movie, I thought it was kind of tipping its cap, but it was in a good way. And again, there's some one-take shots in the hospital specifically that go on surprisingly long, and you can tell that the way that they crafted it, the way that they planned it, was done with a lot of effort to pull off those long one-take shots in different rooms, in different hallways, different things happening with those cat and mouse moments, which I thought, honestly, and it's kind of crazy to say, with The Strangers Chapter 2, was surprisingly a lot of fun. And again, just to talk about this a little bit more, they just did such a better job in this second chapter, which is very important in slasher movies if you're trying to make a more serious, atmospheric, tense, type of a slasher movie with cat and mouse moments that's supposed to be kind of scary, you need to let some of those moments breathe. Some of those moments need to linger. How would people act in those situations? Would they just have small talk with their boyfriend or fiance and just have stupid dialogue thrown in there just because a screenwriter wants to have their dialogue and prove that they're a good writer? No, that's not a realistic portrayal. What would you rather have? Would you rather have the audience pay attention to how they're feeling in those scary, tense moments? Or would you rather have them just listen to some unnecessary small talk? And also, just to be honest, this movie is already elevated because it's not really about just like some corny ass relationship that we could care less about, like in chapter 1. So that helps. But yes, again, like I said a second ago, this movie is still very flawed, unfortunately. There are a lot of dumb, tropey slasher horror movie stuff that goes down in this movie, which horror movie tropes are fine when it's kind of littered here and there a little bit in the movie. But when it's a dumb trope that your character is virtually making at every moment in the movie, that is completely just ridiculous. And they do a lot of that once again in this movie. I feel like it's not quite as annoying as the first one, but just stuff like not finishing off the killer when you clearly should and have an opportunity should, not running away when you have a clear opportunity to run away or drive away, whatever have you, not checking under the killer's mask when you have an obvious opportunity to, trusting people that you clearly should not trust over and over and over. So unfortunately in chapter 2, they do that a lot like they did in chapter 1. Now also with that said, one of the biggest reasons why I actually considered not even having this movie in my top 10 was very similar to what they did with 28 Years Later, promising more movies before the movies even come out. This movie, chapter 1 and chapter 2, there's clearly some stuff that they leave, some meat on the bone. They don't give us everything they've got in this movie to just make it great and then, hey, let's not even worry about another movie, let's make this one great. They clearly left some stuff on the bone in this movie as well. But I think the other things that I mentioned help to really make up for a lot of that. And this movie just doesn't really screw it up. It takes a pretty safe approach to a slasher movie and does it pretty well. Like I said, atmospheric at times, surprisingly, bloody, pretty tense. And overall, I can't even believe that I'm saying The Strangers Chapter 2 is number 7 for the entire year for me. But yeah, just having that idea of, okay, literally from beginning to end, it is just going to be cat and mouse, killing, getting away, hiding, all of that throughout the entire movie. We're not going to mess with any of the real BS that we tried to in that first movie about the stuff that slasher fans don't really care about all that much. They stuck to the basics and yeah, surprisingly did a good job in Strangers Chapter 2. Okay, and coming up next, every year we need to get a solid holiday slasher movie that plays into all the fun little silly tropes of that particular holiday. And this year, it was the movie that I have at number 6, which is Heart Eyes, which of course came out in February. So I saw Heart Eyes a couple times in the theater, and honestly, I was never really bored either time I saw this movie. And it's kind of interesting because I feel like if you're somebody who is a big horror slasher fan and you also tolerate romantic comedy type movies, there's gonna be a lot of stuff that you enjoy there. But I will say, just kind of keep in mind if you have not seen Heart Eyes yet, if you're a big horror fan or big slasher fan and you absolutely cannot tolerate rom-coms, you might want to stay away from this one because when it goes into that rom-com category, it leans way into that stuff. You almost forget it's even a horror or a slasher movie entirely. But I did see this movie once with my wife, who is not a horror fan. She tolerates slasher movies and stuff like that, but she really enjoyed this one because she tolerates slasher movies and tolerates some horror movies, but she really loves rom-coms. And like I said, they do the rom-com side actually really well at times. There's some dialogue in this movie that's actually witty and pretty funny. There's some jokes along the way that I feel like I haven't really heard before, which I was actually pretty surprised about, like how witty and how good the dialogue was. Yeah, there are some corny rom-com moments here and there trickled in this movie. Like, they do just the dumb romantic comedy trope of, oh, we're nervous when we first met each other, so we're gonna like bump each other's heads and all. Just stop doing that, guys. Yes, they do have that in this movie. But overall, I thought they did a great job balancing both of those things, which again can kind of like make this movie appeal to a pretty interesting audience. It's not just a movie made for only horror slasher fans. Like, you could take your wife or your girlfriend or whoever that's not really into that stuff, and they could still have a good time throughout big chunks of this movie. But now I will say, despite a lot of the fun stuff that I enjoyed throughout Hard Eyes, one of the main reasons why this movie isn't higher for me on this list, even though it is still pretty high, is really with the reveal towards the end of this movie. Now, I get this one is not really about the reveal per se. It's more about kind of like the motive behind the reveal and the holiday and all of that. And to be honest, I'm not the type of person who's really good at predicting reveals in slasher movies just in general, nor do I feel like I really put a big emphasis on that. Yeah, I think about it when we get red herrings and other things. I'm kind of thinking about the reveal a little bit and who the killer is going to end up being, but usually I'm just kind of sitting back and enjoying the journey. But with this movie, we have characters that make no sense why they're even on screen at all. It's like, why are we spending so much time with these characters? Oh, I see what you're doing. Yes, they're definitely going to be the killer, and they end up being the killer. I feel like the reveal was not only very predictable, but it was kind of just underwhelming. And in a lot of ways, you could say this movie rides the coattails of the mystery, but doesn't really land the ending by any means when it comes to the big reveal. So that was definitely a miss in this movie. And yes, of course, I am a big slasher fan, and admittedly, typically in slasher movies, you know, we don't always get the greatest cast, the greatest acting or anything like that, but this is definitely one of the better casts that I've seen in a while in a slasher movie. I think Mason Gooding does a really good job in this movie. Of course, you know, we were familiar with him from the Scream franchise, who I also thought he's very solid in that franchise as well. But in this movie, he does a good job, you know, with the comedy, with the romantic side of things and all of that. He's very solid in this. But most of all, I think Olivia Holt is really great, and it's surprising we have an actor and somebody as famous as her in a movie like this. Hopefully we get more of her in the horror genre. Like, that would be amazing, because I think she kind of crushes this role. And overall, the two of them and their chemistry throughout the movie and their wittiness together, I think was done pretty well. And also, just to kind of wrap things up with Hard Eyes, I think the look of the killer is cool. It's very hard to make an iconic look for a slasher movie villain. Like, what mask are you going to use? What's it going to look like? It's hard to not do something that has been done before. Is the look of the killer mind-blowing or something? No, not really, but I think it's solid. But most of all, you can tell they put a lot of thought and emphasis not only in just the way the killer looks, but also the weapons the killer is using that plays into the trope of Valentine's Day and how the kills go down, and some of the settings like the intro at the vineyard and all of that with the comedy and the blood, guts, and gore and the tension. And there's some fun cat and mouse moments in Hard Eyes, some fun gore in this movie, a good look of the killer. The cast is pretty solid, and overall, Hard Eyes is a fun journey. Is it my favorite slasher movie of this decade? No, but a very solid slasher movie, and easily one of the best to watch around Valentine's for sure. All right, if you've been around my channel for more than 2 minutes, you would know how big of a slasher fan I am. And this movie next, coming in at number 5, is my favorite slasher movie of 2025, which is Silent Night, Deadly Night, which came out in December. So going into the second half of 2025, this movie was definitely one of my most anticipated movies of the year. I was just hoping that it wasn't going to end up being the absolute corny pile of dog shit mess that was the I Know What You Did Last Summer reboot, which came out also in 2025. I knew with Cineverse attached to this project, at the very least, it was going to take most likely a darker, grittier, more of a brutal approach and would hopefully have some things and some elements that were, kind of similar to Terrifier 3. Not to say that Terrifier 3 is, the greatest slasher movie of all time or anything like that, but just that brutality, just the unforgiving nature of that movie. But then in turn, put that into the Silent Night, Deadly Night franchise. Yeah, going into watching this movie, I was definitely hoping for something like that. And this one definitely surprised me. I was kind of expecting it to be more of a lower budget, kind of a little bit more of an amateur-ish feeling movie. And there are some moments that do feel a little bit fan filmy-ish, no shade towards like fan films or anything like that. But there are some moments in this movie that feel a little bit less polished than they should be. But overall, I was really surprised, like how good the score was, how good the movie looked. The dialogue was solid. The actual like story arc of the movie, I thought worked overall really, really well. And again, just talking about kind of like Terrifier and that type of a vibe, this movie not only kind of has the aesthetic and the color grading of a movie like Terrifier 2, Terrifier 3, but the gore in Silent Night, Deadly Night, I am happy to say, is not only more than the original movie, that all-time cult classic, but also the gore and the kills and the creativity with them are also just a damn good time. And there's some definitely like dark moments. Now, the movie is not as dark or as unsettling as the original Silent Night, Deadly Night, but I still think it does some stuff that's effective in that area. I do think at times Silent Night, Deadly Night goes a little bit probably too supernatural for me. Like I said, at times, but I did enjoy that they kind of added a supernatural approach to the franchise, which not only pushes the franchise forward, it's a new idea. It felt kind of fresh because that original movie is not supernatural, I guess you could say, at all, really, in my opinion. But this one definitely added that new angle to it, which is kind of crazy. Also, after watching the movie, now, I don't hate Halloween Ends. Yes, Halloween Ends is a very flawed movie. What the hell were they thinking, having that movie as the third movie in that trilogy? It's a video for another time. I have many videos covering that topic. But what's kind of crazy about Silent Night, Deadly Night is not only the fact that Rowan Campbell is in both movies, but this movie, it's almost like Halloween Ends in a bit of a way, minus that whole part about pissing off basically every Michael Myers fan that ever existed. And also, I kind of mentioned this just a second ago, but there's a lot of things in this movie that are clearly inspired by the original, of course, because this is essentially a remake. But it doesn't feel like they're just taking what the remake or what the original movie did really well and then just copy paste, and then making it look, a little more modern and more polished than a movie from the 80s would, right? It doesn't feel like that in this movie. They tip their cap when they need to, but the majority of this movie really does feel like it's its own thing. Like you could watch both the original and this one, and it's not really gonna feel repetitive, in my opinion. Now, very similar to Terrifier, that movie, Terrifier, had scenes that were a big part of the marketing. It was like, holy shit, the bedroom scene, the chainsaw scene, whatever you want to say. These are big moments in the marketing leading up to the movie that are going to get people to go and see that movie because it's just a wild adventure. And in Silent Night, Deadly Night, there's something very similar. You got that big Nazi scene where Rowan Campbell's character as Billy Chapman just slaughters a bunch of people who are at like this Nazi rally celebrating Christmas. And that is a big scene in the movie. It's kind of crazy. Of course, it is over the top. It's bloody. Now, the gore is not amazing in that scene, but that was a crazy moment in this movie, without a doubt. And also, just to talk about Rowan Campbell again, after seeing Halloween Ends, despite the flaws in that movie, despite like the choices they made with the character of Corey, Rowan, I thought, did a great job in Halloween Ends, and I was really excited to see him in more movies, and really damn cool, we get to immediately see him, I mean, not immediate, but shortly after, a couple of years later, in another slasher movie, not just some random movie, but another slasher movie, playing the iconic character of Billy Chapman. And yeah, Rowan, after what he did in Halloween Ends, kind of perfect to play this role of Billy, especially in this movie, tiptoeing that line of, it's kind of similar to actually Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, where, you know, the character kind of like isn't just fully blacked out and unhinged throughout the entire movie. He kind of goes back and forth between kind of seeming just like a little normal and kind of weird to just full on crazy mode, back and forth. And I think Rowan really like tiptoes that in this movie really, really well. And yeah, if there's any other movies in the genre that are going to take a similar approach, I mean, why would you not consider casting him in that role? Because he does a good job just playing somebody who you're like, is this guy normal? He seems a little weird and a little awkward. I don't know. There's something about him that's just kind of off, which works. And I already mentioned how I really enjoy holiday themed slasher movies or horror movies in general, Christmas, Thanksgiving, you know, obviously Halloween, etc., etc. And this movie does a great job playing off of the tropes of Christmas. Sometimes in the genre, we have movies that kind of just feel like by happenstance they're around that particular holiday, whatever holiday it might be. But no, in this movie, it is very Christmassy. So they're playing into the tropes, and it gives this movie that niche during the year when you're thinking about like, damn, what is a slasher movie that, or a horror movie I could watch that's gonna also just make me feel like I wanna sip on some eggnog, but also gives me some horror vibes and just puts me in that Christmas spirit? Well, this movie is going to have that niche, which I think it did really effectively. And overall, I was very, very surprised by Silent Night, Deadly Night. I was not expecting this movie to be on a top 10 list, let alone top 5 for the year for me. But overall, yeah, they kind of knocked it out of the park with the source material that they had for Silent Night, Deadly Night. All right, and coming up next at number 4 was easily one of the most hyped movies in the entire industry in 2025, not just in horror. And this movie, yes, it's number 4, so obviously I had a very good time with it overall, but it is not a perfect movie by any means. Very, very flawed. But especially in the first half of the movie, that's what really put this movie on the this high on this list, especially in the top 10 just in general for me. So up next at number 4 is going to be 28 Years Later, which came out in June. And just in general, I am a big fan of this subgenre, anything involving zombies or anything similar to zombies. I eat it up. I already mentioned that with sci-fi. So immediately just being a huge fan of this subgenre immediately puts this movie kind of on a different pedestal than some of the other like, you know, subgenres that I'm not as big of a fan of. But yeah, this movie was so hyped. I mean, it had been 18 years since 28 Weeks Later, which is by no means as good as 28 Days Later, but still, you know, has some fun moments. But yeah, the second most watched horror movie trailer of all time, only behind It Chapter 2. But yeah, I mean, it got something like 140 something million views overall, 60 million views in like the first 24 hours. So the hype was just crazy. So yeah, it was going to be hard for this movie to live up to that hype, but I don't take that into account at all when I watch new movies, whether people are going to like think they're going to enjoy it or they think they're not going to enjoy it. I could give a shit. Like, I try to clean the slate and just watch the movie. But just for me, there were some things, especially early on and kind of at the end of the movie, that I was not really, I wasn't that big of a fan of. I thought it didn't really live up to my personal expectations, kind of on the bookend part of the movie, the first, like I said, and kind of at the end. I really thought like Danny Boyle, just in general, his attention to detail in some of those scenes was a little bit mediocre for me. But Danny Boyle's ability to create this world with these characters, with the grit on this island, the quarantine zone, just the overall like look into the lives of these people and what it would be like is very similar to what I mentioned earlier, just about atmosphere and lighting and just the overall vibe of the movie. Kind of like a movie like Alien Romulus, which is so flawed, but really just that world. I want to be in that world more. I want to see more of it. And with 28 Years Later, it was very similar. And that's one of the biggest reasons this is number 4 on the list for me, is because this world is just cool as hell, and I can't wait to see the next movie, Bone Temple, as well. They also did a pretty good job in this movie of kind of pushing the franchise forward. Obviously, it was the third movie in the franchise, so we've seen a lot of stuff up until this point. So it's kind of like, what are they going to bring that's kind of new to the subgenre or new to this franchise in general? They add this whole like alpha thing, which adds a new element of brutality and gore. You know, it's bigger, it's smarter, all of that. I also think, yeah, I'm a fan of Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think he, in his particular role in this movie as like this very flawed human in a lot of ways, I think he played that role really well. And to me, he was my favorite character in the entire movie. It was unfortunate, you know, towards like the second half of the movie, they kind of removed that character entirely, which again, like I mentioned earlier, one of the other flaws with the second half and towards the end of the movie that I didn't like. But also great to see Ralph Fiennes in this one as well. You know, he's a great actor, does a great job in this one. So yeah, he definitely elevated the movie as well, along with Aaron Taylor Johnson. And one of the biggest reasons why 28 years later is this high on my list for me is just the overall way that this movie looks. And obviously in the marketing to the movie, there was a lot of talk about like shooting, you know, the majority of this movie on iPhones and all that crazy stuff. This is honestly one of the best looking movies that I have seen in a very long time, especially in the first half of the movie. There's some moments there where it looks really damn good. And the way that it's shot, there is some genuine tension and anxiety, and it's just great stuff. I mean, there is a scene at night with Aaron Taylor Johnson's character and his son, and they have to cross this land bridge, and they're being chased by something. And not only is that scene shot so incredibly well, in my opinion, it's at night, the lighting is on point, the way they pull it all off, it just works so well. I felt like the tension in that moment was off the charts. You know, you kind of don't really know what's going to happen. The stakes feel really, really high. And I was genuinely sitting there like white knuckling it in my chair. And yes, one of the biggest flaws with 28 years later is the fact that they promised more movies and they clearly held back so much stuff that could have made this movie even better. But still, regardless of that, the look, the vibe of the movie, the tension in the movie, especially in some of those moments I mentioned, this is a movie that has some rewatchability for me without a doubt. I saw it multiple times in the theater, and I'm really, really excited for the sequel. All right, coming up next at number 3 is easily one of the eeriest movies of the year, especially if you're a parent. And in my opinion, one of the best acted movies of the year. Coming in the 3 spot is going to be Weapons, which came out in August. So I remember before Weapons came out, it felt like virtually every horror fan in existence was like, holy shit, the director of Barbarian is making a new movie, just take my money. For me personally though, I feel like Barbarian is way, way overrated. I think Barbarian is just okay to me. I feel like the first half of Barbarian is just the acting and the story. It's very generic and basic to me. I do think the second half of Barbarian is decent. I think it's one of those classic movies where there's really nothing all that unique or interesting happening. So they just try to gross you out as much as they possibly can, hoping that will like leave a lasting effect on you. But the story, like I said, is just, there's nothing really cool or unique happening here. But I feel like if you've seen more than a couple horror movies in your life, you'll spot that out from a million miles away. But now with that said, there was enough in Barbarian for me that made me interested in seeing like the next Zach Cregger project. I wanted to kind of see if his work was going to evolve. And really overall for me, I thought Weapons was a million times better than Barbarian. Not only is the story way more relatable for somebody like me who's a dad of a 5 and a 7-year-old. Yeah, I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs over the years, you know, which is a kind of an angle they take in Barbarian. But still, just this overall story of like normal American suburbia, you know, these kids disappearing and all that, and just the eeriness and the way it looked like it was shot and the trailers and stuff. I was like, oh, all All right, hell yeah. And they pulled a lot of that stuff off really well in this movie. And just to piggyback off of what I mentioned just a second ago, the cast and the acting in this movie is really, really top notch. Arguably, a top 3 acted and casted horror movie of the year, I would say easily. Second shout out again for Julia Garner on this list. I think she's great in Weapons. She really nails the role that she's in. Also, we got Josh Brolin in this movie as well, and I think he does a really good job. This stuff is kind of in his blood, man. I mean, his dad, James Brolin, was in the original Amityville Horror from 1979. He was great in that movie, and Josh, continues that legacy in the genre, and I think he works really well in this one. He plays this dad who's like a local contractor who's just really pissed about like the lack of the police doing what they need to do. He doesn't think, people are really trying as hard as they should to figure all this stuff out. And he starts to piece together the clues and tries to figure this out on his own. Yeah, I wish they would have leaned into that angle of the story with Josh more. I think that would have been more fun. But still, overall, yeah, I think Josh and the rest of the cast, Julia, and everyone is top notch in this movie. But again, as a dad of a 5 and a 7-year-old, just Weapons and watching the movie and the concept of this movie in suburbia, this just eerie and unsettled take on this normal suburban town. You're going to meetings at school, you're seeing the school, 17 kids in the same class disappearing the same night. Like, that's a crazy concept, and I think it really worked in this one. Now, one thing that knocks Weapons a bit for me, obviously it's top 3 on this list, but one of the biggest reasons why it's not number 1 or anything like that is I don't think they nailed the ending, in my opinion. I kind of don't really think they nailed the whole second half of the movie. I don't think the second half is bad, but they didn't quite just like nail the landing for me. Sometimes these movies that are going to have like a big reveal, or they're just going to tell you eventually what the hell happened. It kind of rides off of the coattails of the mystery of the movie, and the first half is where this movie, for me, is really incredible, like an all-time classic. If they could have continued that and really nailed the second half of the movie and made the reveal super unbelievable and unpredictable and mind-blowing and crazy, if they could have done that, I mean, Weapons, holy shit, it probably would have been number 1 on this list. But I think the reveal was very generic, very predictable. It was like nothing. We'd seen it a million times before, this person doing this thing that we could clearly see laid out before us. Yeah, the ending at the very, very end was pretty satisfying, like the ultimate conclusion, everything. But yeah, I just don't think they nailed the very end as well as they could have. But again, what really made this movie for me was the first half, the mystery, trying to figure these things out. They hadn't shown us too much yet. The acting with the other characters as they're navigating all of that, yeah, was really, really top notch. So in the end, when it comes to Weapons, this might sound weird me saying this because it is top 3 for the entire year of 2025 for my best horror movies of the year. Do I think Weapons is a bit overrated? Yeah, I would probably say though, but I would probably agree with saying it's overrated. But for me, it is easily one of the most just kind of well-crafted, eerie, and again, best acted horror movies of the year by a mile. Really had a good time with Weapons, and yeah, looking forward to watching it again soon. All right, up next at number 2 as my second favorite horror movie of the year comes from maybe my favorite guilty pleasure horror franchise, maybe of all time. I'm a little surprised, actually, that this movie ended up being number 2 for the entire year for me as I was going through this list and really thinking about the movies, all of the horror movies I had seen for the year. But coming in at number 2 is going to be Final Destination Bloodlines, which came out in May. And in a lot of cases, these movies are really only as good as their opening premonition is, and Final Destination has a damn good opening premonition. Now, I have all the premonitions in that franchise ranked on my channel if you want to check out that video, but this one, it really is up there as one of the best in the franchise. Great tension, great fake outs, a great setting. It looks good. It's crazy and over the top when it needs to be. It makes you laugh when it needs to be. It's just a really, really fun opening premonition in the Final Destination franchise. I mean, yeah, this whole like tower thing, like the Space Needle, maybe it's not as relatable of an opening premonition as the big freeway pileup or the roller coaster or the airplane in the first movie or whatever have you. But throughout the entire opening, the first time I saw it in the theater on a massive screen, I mean, honestly, like the tension was pretty top notch. I was gripping my chair the entire time and also laughing and all of that. It was a damn good time. And yeah, of course, this is Final Destination, so not only the opening premonition, but you gotta have some great kills along the way. And Final Destination Bloodlines has some of the best kills in this entire franchise. There are several that are very memorable that I will never forget for a very, very long time. I mean, the lawnmower death scene, the MRI machine, come on now, like that is damn good. The garbage truck kill is also incredible. And I have all the deaths in the entire franchise also ranked on my channel in a tier list if you want to check that out as well, just to kind of see which ones were my favorite in Final Destination Bloodlines. But again, this movie, it kind of does what it's supposed to do in a Final Destination movie. It's supposed to take things that you see in your everyday life and make you look at those things in a different way forever. And also, unlike a movie like Final Destination 4, which is not only just not a good enough movie, but also doesn't play off of the Final Destination things well enough to convert non-Final Destination fans or kind of convert, and also just keep normal fans of the franchise really, really happy. I feel like Final Destination Bloodlines does that. If you're either on the fence about the franchise, I feel like this movie could convert you to be a pretty big fan of the franchise. If you've never seen a movie in this franchise before, it could turn you into a big fan of it. And also, it has enough in it where the core fans of this franchise who have enjoyed it since the very beginning will also be very, very satisfied because it's modern, but it also just has that foundation of the franchise within it, and it pulls it off really, really well. Is it a flawless Final Destination movie? No. Is it my favorite Final Destination movie in the franchise? No. It doesn't quite have the charm or some of the nostalgia as some of the earlier movies in this one do have for me, but Bloodlines, it's a damn good time, and obviously, easily one of my favorite horror movies of 2025. All right, now before I get into my number one horror movie of 2025, I did want to mention some honorable mentions. And there's quite a few movies I could have as an honorable mention, but I'll just mention a few. I just said mention way too many times. But the first one up that I want to talk about is a movie I feel like is also kind of like Ash, very under the radar. I feel like I've heard nobody talk about it, and it's called The Damned. This was a movie that came out, I think, January of 2025. It might have been the first horror movie I saw of the entire year. I think I was the only one in the theater for it, but it's one of those movies I feel like is very atmospheric. It's cold, it's isolated, it's unforgiving in a lot of ways. The environment, the people, and what's happening. And kind of an underrated gem of the year, in my opinion. Another honorable mention for me is a movie that a lot of you will probably have on your top 10 list, which is Bring Her Back, which is a movie that did a lot of things really, really well. It's acted really, really well. But one of the reasons why that movie is not on my top 10 list is because I feel like the whole movie is just a mishmash of pulling different things from other great horror movies. Like, it didn't feel unique at all to me. But again, the acting is great in that movie, and it's easily one of the most unsettling, depressing, and disturbing movies of 2025 for sure. It's a movie that it could have been on my top 10 list, but I feel like it makes the most sense for me personally to be outside of it. But also another movie I want to mention is Marshmallow, it's called. It's got that summer camp kind of a vibe to it, but with a unique twist. It's a fun, lower budget movie with a cool production, and it's a fun little twist on like your normal summer camp horror movie. So I recommend checking that one out. And again, I could talk about a few other movies, but the last one I'm going to talk about in this video as an honorable mention is Black Phone 2, which is a movie I also had a lot of fun with. I thought it was a really fun setting for that type of a movie. It takes the summer camp thing again, but then adds like a snowy, isolated winter approach to a summer camp, which I thought was pretty cool. There's definitely some supernatural stuff going on with that movie. The summer camp's got this dark backstory they explore throughout the movie. And I thought overall, The Black Phone 2 was a fun sequel that I could definitely see a lot of people having in their top 10 list. All right, yes, of course, up next as my favorite horror movie of 2025, we're going to talk a little Ryan Coogler here for a minute. This man's just sheer attention to detail, his clear passion for filmmaking, which I think is infectious. And I love the fact that he made a vampire movie set in 1932 in the Mississippi Delta. Like, that is a damn good idea. And with Ryan Coogler attached to the project on top of that, that is just a hell yeah from me. So obviously, my favorite horror movie of the year is Sinners, which feels like it came out a lifetime ago, but it came out in April. Now, yeah, this is a horror movie list, so a lot of these movies were made on a pretty small budget, but Sinners, not the case. This is the biggest budget movie on this entire list. And I would say definitely the movie on this top 10 list that would appeal to the widest, just general movie going audience. I'm sure some of you have people who are not really like big horror fans who saw Sinners. I know I do. A lot of friends and family that saw Sinners and talked about it. It left a big impression on them. But still, even though this movie does cater to a pretty wide audience and it has a big budget and a big production behind it, it's still a movie that is brutal and thoughtful and I feel like dark when it should be. But really, what a cool movie, man. Sinners, I feel like it's one of those movies that will inspire a lot of young people to either go to film school or make their first movie. It's just one of those that feels so like unique and well crafted, and it looks good and the music's great and all of that. And I think just to kind of give you like a bird's eye view of Sinners overall for me, I remember after watching this movie for the first time, and I still feel this way as well. This movie is not perfect, but of course, my favorite horror movie of the year. I feel like about 80% of Sinners is damn near perfect. 10% of the movie, just kind of okay. And then the other 10%, mainly at the very end of the movie, involving some of the action stuff and things like that, honestly made no sense to me. But I mean, if 80% of your movie is damn near perfect in my eyes, obviously that's going to be a pretty good movie when all is said and done. And again, like I mentioned earlier, what a cool setting for a vampire type of a movie. I've lived in the South for a short amount of my life. You know, I've experienced some of the areas down there, and there's just a lot of stuff that really works with a movie like this. And for me personally, I'm not necessarily done with it, but it's overplayed, just like, you know, gothic Victorian era vampire movies. Like, okay, we've seen that way too many times. Yeah, if it's done well, I'll still go and see it. But I like vampire movies that just have a little bit more of a unique setting. Like, hell, give me a vampire movie in like World War II, or give me, you know, vampires in the Civil War era. Hell, give me a vampire movie that is set on another planet like Mars or something like that. But this setting, you know, 1932, that era, all the crazy stuff that was happening during that era, especially down in a place like Mississippi, there's just a lot you can work with. And I think Ryan Coogler really clearly did his homework and just put so much thought into every single detail in Sinners. And then on top of that, when you start mixing in some of the Irish folklore with the vampire stuff and the music throughout this movie, which is honestly incredible. At times, the movie kind of feels like a musical, to be honest, you know, which could be, you know, good or bad for you. But I think there are some moments where the music does get a little bit, probably a little too crazy or a little bit too much for me. But overall, the music and the folklore and all that history and everything like that, Yeah, I mean, just honestly, damn, it was good. And also another sign of a great movie is when you have these side characters who really don't get much screen time, who we don't dive really into their story much at all in Sinners, but you want to learn so much more about them. You're just thirsting for more. And it feels like to me, you could make a whole nother movie just about these side characters that we meet just for a minute, which is kind of crazy. And I'm talking about the Native Americans in Sinners who hunt vampires. It's just like, man, I want to know so much more about those characters, what they've been up to, what they're doing, you know, what's going on. And I love that when movies have these side characters that you don't get to learn much about, and you just have to end up using your imagination with those characters. I think what they also did such a damn good job of in Sinners is using this idea of the temptation of vampire immortality as something that is like so alluring and kind of fascinating in this movie. And I kept thinking to myself as I watched Sinners, like, man, they're kind of really selling me on this whole thing. And I love that. And they pulled that off so well. And I really enjoyed watching the characters and the actors, like the inner battle with them of just the kind of temptation of that immortality and becoming a vampire and some of the other benefits with that, you know, especially during such a tough era, a tough time in America for so many people. There's so much poverty in this movie. And then somebody dangles in front of you immortality, power, abilities, probably wealth, all these other things that could come to you. It's like, damn, man, like that's actually really, really tempting. And also the cast in Sinners is really, really top notch. I feel like pretty much everybody in this movie does just a very good job from top to bottom. I mean, Michael B. Jordan is really incredible in this movie, playing two characters. The Smokestack twins is really great in this one, really locks you in so many of the scenes that those characters are in. Some emotional moments, some crazy moments, you know, some action sequences, a lot of versatility from Michael B. Jordan in this movie. Jack O'Connell, incredible in this one. Cannot wait to see what he does in the next 28 Years Later movie. Really looking forward to seeing Jack do some more stuff in that. Haley Steinfeld, also very, very solid in this movie. I could go on and on and on. The cast is truly incredible in this movie. I think this movie would surpass a movie like Weapons as like cast and acting, definitely. Yeah, I would say the best acted and the best cast of any horror movie in 2025, I would say easily. And yeah, really overall, I thought Sinners was really incredible. I need to go back and rewatch this movie again soon. I'm getting the itch to watch it again. Again, some of the action stuff in the end of the movie I thought was a little sloppy. But overall, man, it hits those beats that a great movie should. A unique story, a unique setting. Clearly, the production did so much homework. Great music, brutality, darkness mixed with lighthearted love stories on top of it. Just an interesting story overall that is so well crafted. And yeah, can't wait to see the next projects that Ryan Coogler works on very, very soon. And again, to me, Sinners, I think, yeah, it's just the best horror movie of 2025. But all right, everybody, that is my list of my top 10 horror movies of 2025. Again, not an incredible year for the horror genre, but quite a few very solid movies nonetheless. But again, let me know down in the comments down below which horror movies in 2025 were your favorites. Give me your top 10, give me your top 20, whatever have you. I read all of my comments, so looking forward to seeing what you guys put as your favorite horror movies of the year. But if you want some more videos from me right now, go ahead and check out some of these videos next to me. If you don't want to miss future videos on the channel, the best way to do that is to make sure you subscribe. A lot of cool stuff cooking up for 2026. We've got some absolute bangers in the movie world coming out in 2026. So looking forward to talking more movies with you guys very, very soon. But all of my social media links are down below in the description if you want to follow me over there. But again, everybody, thanks so much for watching. Thank you for all the support in 2025. It was a great year, the best year ever for me on the channel. Really a lot of fun talking movies with you guys. But again, thanks for watching this video. My name is Matt, and I will talk to you in the next one.